From WIS Politics in Madison, you're listening to Capital Chats.
Hello, everybody. This is Kate Morton with WIS Politics, here with the Capital Chats podcast brought to you by Spectrum. Today, I'm here to share an interview with U.S. Representative Gwen Moore, a Democrat from Milwaukee. We spoke a little bit about the debate over immigration enforcement funding, as well as a recent ruling narrowing the Voting Rights Act, and more. Here's what she had to say. All right. Well, thank you, Representative Moore, for joining me on the podcast today. I think to get us started off, I wanted to ask you about this proposal Republicans are working on ICE and Border Patrol funding. As you know, that also includes $1 billion for security for the new White House ballroom. So I guess to start off, what's your response to Republicans choosing to use the reconciliation process to avoid a Dem filibuster in the Senate?
Well, I think that you have really made the important point. They're choosing this vehicle, a reconciliation bill, to avoid cooperating with Democrats in the House, and also not to have to be troubled by the filibuster, which would mean that they'd have to have some sort of comedy and conversation, negotiations with Democrats in the Senate. So when you hear reconciliation, just think a totally partisan activity to exclude the other party from conversations. And we're proud of the fact that we're forcing them to do a reconciliation bill because we were not prepared. We're very proud of the fact that we got the Homeland Security bill funded all except for ICE and the CBE, Customs and Border Enforcement agencies, because of the tremendous abuses that we saw. And what Democrats were asking for was not something revolutionary or new or novel or strange, but just normal policing. Acknowledging people's constitutional rights, not bursting into their homes without a judicial warrant, um, enforcement that not wearing masks and not having badges and traditional police officer recognizable clothing instead of hoodies. I think that the American people found that extremely relatable, which is one of the reasons that we have seen enforcement sort of tamped down since a Minnesota. And so they're going to put this through reconciliation so that they can have $38.2 billion for immigration and customs enforcement and another $26 billion for customs border protection. And as you mentioned, $1 billion for security upgrades for the new White House ballroom. Now, we heard that this was going to be a $250 million ballroom that was being donated by anonymous donors. But we're going to pay $1 billion for security upgrades. I mean, it just seems like an awful hard gift. For it to cost 4 times as much for security upgrades as the gift. This bill also has a slush fund in it for Homeland Security. They've already spent, I believe, like 175. They were already given 175 billion in the one great big beautiful bill, and so we're spending money just like it was, like it was growing on trees for this war.
Now, yeah, so I also want to ask you about the midterm prospects for Democrats. There's been some wrenches thrown in that. For example, the recent Supreme Court decision narrowing the Voting Rights Act, the Virginia State Supreme Court striking down Dem maps in that state. So what do you see being the impact of those rulings, particularly for the midterms?
Well, I'll tell you that really clearly any student of history knows that they're carrying us all the way back to the 19th century, to the like 1871s. I was reading Jim Clyburn's book where he talked about the first 8 congressmen and how they fought these very same issues. Uh, 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 and then his book goes up to talk about the struggle in the 1960s for the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. And clearly, they want to take us back to 1871. That being the case, I'm very proud to see a multiracial resistance to what they're doing, And I can tell you, those Tennessee lawmakers who lost their seats because they refused to redistrict, you know, they will go down in history as heroes. This is something that has disrupted their career at this point, but the history will recognize them as doing the right thing. In Alabama, it is so obvious that they're making political decisions. Just 2 years prior, they determined that the Samori figure seat was constitutional, and now uh, uh, their ruling demonstrates, the conflicting and contradictory decisions that they're rendering just to support having a majority Republican a voting bloc. And so I think that the hypocrisy is just evident. You don't need a law degree or some legal analyst to figure it out. Now, having said that, I can tell you that our strategy is we only needed 3 seats this session to have regained the majority. And we are protecting 22 incumbents that are in marginal seats. And we are being aggressive on 44 seats. So we have 66 seats, within our crosshairs and so, I think they may be too clever by half because they have redistricted, say, for example, in Texas or anywhere else, if they've redistricted and there was a Republican plus 12 district, say, we've been winning these midterms. We've been, there's been like 12-point swings. So if there's some Republican R+7 district out there, they need to watch out because people are mad. They're mad about the inflation. They're mad that even those people who voted for Trump are mad because their prices are sky high, not just gas from the war, but from the tariffs and the chaos and um, um, uh, you know, the fact that the stock market is rising is certainly not appeasing people who can't buy a home, can't afford a down payment. People are older than ever, trying to be a first-time home buyer, um, and and what we know is that people can't be convinced that things are all right because the S&P is doing great or the NASDAQ is doing great. People ain't buying it.
So, how do you see the impact of these rulings having on the Black Caucus specifically?
Well, I can tell you that we may not see the impact of this in 2026, these midterms, but certainly in 2028.
Hmm.
uh, we suspect that all the people who didn't redistrict this time may try to do it again. It's clearly a race to the bottom. We saw what happened in Virginia when they actually took this to the people. And there's the Virginia Supreme Court overruled the voice of the people. I mean, amazing, amazing. And so this is war. Uh, History may not repeat itself, but it certainly rhymes. This certainly feels like what we've gone through before. And, as Martin Luther King Jr. said, and Obama often quoted, the mark of the moral universe is bending toward justice. And I think the more people see what's going on, the closer we're going to be able to fight this and beat this, within this generation.
Yeah, now another thing I want to ask you about is this ongoing war in Iran. Trump this week said that the ceasefire is on life support, the price tag's reaching more than 29 billion. What do you make of the arguments that the Trump administration is making that they don't need to seek congressional approval for this?
Well, it's clear that they think that they shouldn't seek congressional approval, except for it's like in our Constitution and in our laws that after 60 days, they have to come to Congress to do it. Their argument is that because we've had a ceasefire or something we're calling a ceasefire, that automatically gets us an extension. This president really should move to another country, I think, because he has really negative view of our Constitution and our laws. There is nothing this president doesn't respect our Constitution or our bodies of laws. And that is why we see the Senate and the House continuing to put up resolution after resolution after resolution, war powers resolutions to force the president. We're losing these votes by one vote, by two votes. We're continuing, and we're not going to stop doing it because that is our job. When people think, what is the job of members of Congress? Declaring war is one of the major jobs that we have and passing a budget. And so here the president wants to take away all of our, and of course, weighing in on tariffs. So this is a president who doesn't have any respect for Congress. And this is exemplary of his having no respect for Congress. But we're going to continue to demand that there be votes on war on our war powers. We certainly don't agree with the $29 billion that have already been spent. We know that the president is going to be sending us a bill asking for something on the order of, 1.5 trillion. If they're going to send us a resolution for $1.5 trillion to continue this war. And, they're going to have a hard time getting those votes from Democrats for real. And so, I suspect that there will be much weeping and gnashing of teeth and whipping of Republicans to get in line for them to get that money because this is a war that Congress did not agree upon. And this is our job and our duty.
Now, do you see this having a negative impact for Republicans in the midterms?
Well, the way it'll have a negative impact is that midterm elections are, only the truly the people who are watching politics on a regular basis participate in. And I think that the enthusiasm for Donald Trump has waned a bit. And to the extent that Republicans may not show up, is what Republicans fear, because Democrats are much more motivated to get to the polls during these midterms than Republicans are. And so that's really the challenge for us is to put our message out there and so that people can understand. I mean, their message clearly is very confusing. Oh yeah, we needed this war. Oh, gas prices are going to be high just for a little while, but just put up with $6 a gallon gas and it'll be okay someday. Um, yeah, inflation is higher than it's ever been, but look at the stock market. The stock market is great. I think this is that their messaging is wrong, which is one of the reasons that they're trying to push the Save America Act. They're trying to redistrict because they know that they're not on target, that their message is not appealing to the masses. They know that there are more people who would vote Democratic than Republicans. And so if they can't win with their message, then it's necessary to cheat.
All right. Thank you again, Representative, for coming on the podcast today, and we really appreciate it. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Capitol Chats. If you'd like to learn more about Wisconsin's congressional delegation, you can subscribe to our DC Wrap newsletter. In the meantime, you're listening to WisPolitics Capitol Chats, brought to you by Spectrum.